All right. Welcome back, everyone. Now, as you can see, I'm on the road yet again, actually here in near Mount Rushmore, attending the, one of the libertarian conferences out here, Freedom Fest. Folks, a lot of stories to go into tonight. We're going to start by talking about how the Democrats actually just blocked a bill that was supposed to declassify some documents from the intelligence community about the origin of the virus. And while they're calling for investigations into China, calling for investigations into maybe these laboratories, even the World Health Organization's calling for it, there were actually intelligence community assessments already. And remember that previous assessments had suggested already that this may have come from a Chinese laboratory, leaked, natural or artificial, who knows? But it has been blocked. We'll be going into that. Also, folks, update on Larry Elder's campaign for governor in California. Remember, he had this lawsuit against the California government because they blocked him from being on the ballot. Well, he won the lawsuit already. So we're going to go into that. A lot of other stories tonight, a lot to talk about. And folks, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Around the halfway mark, we'll go into them. And folks, good to see you as always. Hey, Mickey Settlemeyer said, "Hey there, Josh. Good to see you. Thank you." Maya Rose, hi from Mexico. Yeah, good folks. Good to see you all here. Jack Delaney, good to see you as always. Keith Feeble, what's up? Yeah, thank you. All right, folks, a lot to go into. Let's get started on the first story of the night. Let's talk about this House bill that has been blocked by the Democrats. We're supposed to investigate, declassify documents about the origin of the virus. Let's go into it. It says here, House Democrats blocked consideration of legislation that would require the U.S. Director of National Intelligence to declassify information and data related to the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that namely targeted what role the Wuhan Institute of Virology played in the outbreak. It says in May, the Senate Republican-backed COVID-19 Origin Act was passed unanimously in the Senate. Representative Michael Burgess of Texas brought the Senate bill to the House floor on Tuesday night before Democrats voted it down. And it says, this is a quote from Representative Brad Wenstrup, a Republican also. It says, "The best disinfectant is sunlight, and that's what we can prove today." And he said that he helped bring the bill to the House floor on this, right? And he says as well, "The bill first establishes that we must identify the precise origin of COVID-19 because it is critical for preventing a similar pandemic in the future." And Wenstrup said that the measure is not controversial by any means, and noted that not one senator objected to the legislation when it was up for consideration in the Senate in May. It was bipartisan back then. Now, according to the text of the bill, identifying the origin of COVID-19 caused by the CCP virus is crucial in preventing a similar pandemic in the future from occurring. The bill also noted that Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros, as we've been talking about for a while now, even acknowledged in March that more investigation into the theory the virus leaked from a laboratory in Wuhan, China is warranted. So, folks, why they would block this, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. But it's very strange, actually, because, again, if you really want to deal with a pandemic, if you have a pandemic and you really want to stop it, one of the first steps is to find out what the origin was, because until you can find out what the origin was, you can't stop another outbreak from happening. Maybe it's an animal origin. You need to deal with those animals. Maybe it's a location. You need to deal with that location. Until you can acknowledge where the virus came from, you really can't start, taking steps to really deal with it. And the fact that they would try to block this is actually very strange, especially given the narratives that they seem interested in stopping this thing from spreading. So we'll have to see what happens with it. I'll keep you all updated on it, but strange update to this bill. Now, real quick, folks, I mentioned before that Crossroads is totally demonetized by YouTube. It's why we don't have Super Chat. It's why we don't have advertisement. But luckily, we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. With all the turbulence in the economy, multi-trillion dollars in spending, China waging trade war against the U.S., currency war, new digital currencies, and we could go on and on. You can consider investing in an asset that's usually pretty stable and typically on the incline. That's gold and silver. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. Now, to learn more about that, you can check the link below in the description, where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. And really, you just want to learn about investing in gold, check it out. It's free. But if you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver in all qualifying first orders. The phone number for that is 877-260-2764. You can also text Joshua to 65532. And on that note, I got a couple of things to show you. This is one of the silver coins, as you can see. And this is one of the gold coins here as well. So, American Hartford Gold, again, big thanks out to them for sponsoring tonight's episode. And folks, a lot more to go into about this virus, which I want to go over now. And now, in addition to them blocking blocking information that's already been gathered, right, by the U.S. intelligence community on the origin of the virus, it's actually interesting to see that the White House, the Biden administration, seems to be kind of not following the Democrat narrative on this, at least not for the House. Again, it was passed by the Senate, but House Democrats blocked it. But here we have something interesting from the White House. They're saying now that China's opposition to investigation into the origin of this virus is irresponsible. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on July 22nd, the Chinese Communist Party's recent move to reject a second investigation into the origin of the CCP virus is dangerous, and called on the regime to allow investigators inside the country without any interference. Now, this is, of course, calling for a real investigation in China and asking to go especially to the Wuhan laboratory. Remember that the World Health Organization did, conduct an investigation, the contexts of which were never made public, because it turned out they didn't actually investigate. Several individuals with it had ties to the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party had people following them the entire time. Investigators never even looked at the possibility of a lab origin, and they were handed research by the Chinese Communist Party itself, which they based everything on. We never saw it come out from that. We came out from that because even before it was released, even like mainstream media and so on were saying it was a bunch of nonsense. And so, of course, there's been calls now to actually have an investigation. Will that actually happen? Probably not. And even if they did go to the Wuhan Institute of Virology at this point, they probably wouldn't find anything. And you know why? It's because shortly after the outbreak happened, what did the CCP do? They had the head of their biowarfare military department take over the laboratory. Why would the Chinese Communist Party have the head of their military biological warfare branch take over that laboratory around the same time if there was no need to investigate the lab? If there was no possible controversy with the lab, why would the CCP send the head of a biowarfare branch of their military to take it over? Right? Maybe the CCP thought the lab was important. And why did Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, start talking about biolab safety right around this time? When, again, at the same time as the CCP was looking into this, the same time the CCP was sending people to the laboratory, military individuals to go, who knows what, probably clean it up. The media, the different institutions in this country, the scientific journals, ironically, Dr. Fauci in his emails we saw trying to cover this stuff up, working with individuals like Mark Zuckerberg and so on, talking with them, that you were not allowed to even talk about this in the United States. Why was that the case, right? Now, interesting developments with this. We'll see what actually happens with it, but we do know that the intelligence community in the United States did have research on this. And that research did inform the Trump administration at the time into the possible origins of the virus, which he based a lot of his policies on. And that has now been blocked from being seen by the public. Now, let's see what goes on with this. Now, a few other stories on what's happening with this virus I want to go into, though. Mitch McConnell is warning of what we went through last year if more people don't get COVID-19 vaccines. And hear this out. He said, it says here, more Americans should get vaccinated against the virus that causes COVID-19, or the country could see harsh measures imposed this fall. The top Republican in Congress said Wednesday. This is him saying it, Mitch McConnell. He says, it never occurred to me 3 highly effective vaccines were developed in under a year that we'd have difficulty getting Americans to take the shots. But that's obviously where we are. That's Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell telling reporters at the U.S. Capitol in Washington. He said this as well. I want to underscore in the strongest possible manner I can, and I say this with some authority, as you all know, as a result of being a polio victim myself and being very aware that it took 7 decades to come up with 2 effective polio vaccines. This was done in under 1 year. Still not FDA approved, notably. And he continues stating, these shots need to get in everybody's arm as rapidly as possible, or we're going to be back in a situation in the fall that we don't yearn for and that we went through last year. So in other words, folks, it puts the vaccine in the skin, or it gets the lockdowns again. Seems to be the narrative coming out with this. We'll see what they end up doing with it. But again, you have DeSantis in Florida saying it's a seasonal flu, seasonal virus, and we'll have to see what happens. Now, we are dealing, of course, with new mutations of the virus, the Delta variant and others. We'll have to see what happens with it. But a few of the things on this that are quite interesting. Get this. There's a nonprofit organization now suing HHS to immediately stop emergency use authorization of the COVID-19 vaccines. And let's go into this, because as we've been discussing before, there's actually been some pushback from the medical community because they're actually violating a lot of medical protocols really with all of this. Let's go into what they're saying here. It says, America's Frontline Doctors, which is a nonprofit, filed a motion on July 19th seeking immediate injunctive relief to stop the emergency use authorization of COVID-19 vaccines for 3 groups of Americans: anyone under the age of 18, anyone who has recovered from COVID-19, meaning you might have the antibodies, and those who haven't given informed consent as defined by federal law. Defined by federal law, folks, meaning that they might be violating federal law, but let's see how this court case comes out. It says the motion was filed against Javier Becerra, Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, again HHS, and other defendants in a federal district court in Northern District of Alabama. And this is a complaint stating the emergency declaration and its multiple renewals are illegal. And according to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, when the HHS secretary declares that an emergency use is appropriate, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, may then authorize unapproved use or EUA of a vaccine. Now, glad to see what happens with this. One of the big parts, again, is that they say this violates the law of, again, of informed consent. And so we'll have to see what happens with this. But there's a lot of pushback now against the vaccines as well. And folks, again, I'll keep you all updated on this as we go forward. Now, another story here. I mentioned last episode that Larry Elder, who has a show with Epoch Times, the Larry Elder Show, and he does one with Salem as well, a radio show, is running for governor in the recall elections of Governor Newsom in California. Quick update, too. I think I said it wrong last time. I think I said mayor last time, and I apologize for that. I meant to say governor. He's running again to be governor of California in the recall of Governor Newsom. But something interesting happened, which is that when they went through and put the names on the ballots, they didn't put Larry Elder's name on the ballot. And Larry Elder filed a lawsuit against that. And guess what, folks? He just won that lawsuit. It happened very quickly. He won the lawsuit. Larry Elder's name is now on that ballot. It says here, longtime talk show host Larry Elder will be a listed candidate on the California gubernatorial recall ballot after being previously disqualified. A Sacramento judge ruled July 21st. And Elder told EpochTV that, quote, I won my court case. We will be on the ballot. So, again, that's going to be in September, the recall of Governor Newsom. We'll see if they vote for it. People have to vote for it. And as they vote for it, they can choose who they would want to replace him. Governor Newsom is in an interesting position with this because, well, he's not even going to have a D next to his name. They're not going to list him as Democrat. At the same time that Larry Elder is now being put on the ballot, it's actually interesting that Vice President Kamala Harris is now getting behind and promoting Governor Newsom. And so you have Governor Newsom now being propped up, at least backed by Kamala Harris, again, Vice President, and Larry Elder now being one of the candidates listed on the ballot. So we'll see what happens in September. There's a lot going on with this. Let's go a bit deeper into it. Now, folks, again, real quick, if you do have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them around the halfway point. So again, we'll get to the Q&A in just a bit. I want to go over a few other stories first, though. Now, we've been talking for a while about what's happening with gun control. We call them anti-Second Amendment laws, is what you could call them also. And something interesting is happening right now that the Department of Justice is taking kind of a different direction with it. Now the Department of Justice is deploying strike forces, as they call them, in 5 different cities to fight illegal gun trafficking. And let's go into what's happening here and kind of the bigger picture of what this might tie into. Now it says here, Attorney General Merrick Garland is rolling out 5 cross-jurisdictional strike forces to disrupt illegal firearm trafficking in key regions across the United States, according to officials. Garland, along with Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, visited Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, headquarters in Washington on July 22nd for the official start of the program before traveling to Chicago, one of the 5 strike force cities, according to officials. And this is a quote. It says here, all too often, guns found at crime scenes come from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. We are redoubling our efforts as ATF works with law enforcement to track the movement of illegal firearms used in violent crimes, Garland said in a statement. Now, briefly on this, it's interesting to note that what they're talking about here, they're admitting now that guns, they say all too often, guns found at crime scenes come from hundreds or even thousands of miles away. They're really stating here something that conservatives have been stating for a long time, which is that most gun crime does not come from people who legally own the firearms. In other words, not legal firearm owners. It's coming from people who have the guns illegally. In other words, law-abiding gun owners are not the problem. The problem is people who are not able to legally own the firearms. Let's go a bit deeper into this, though, because this has some broader implications on it. It says here, these strike forces enable sustained coordination across multiple jurisdictions to help disrupt the worst gun trafficking corridors. They say the effort, which the Department of Justice first announced on June 22nd, is meant to strengthen enforcement against gun trafficking networks to disrupt the flow of unlawfully obtained firearms into places where they are used to commit crimes. Now, it's not quite clear on what they mean in terms of going after people who are trafficking firearms. Now, we would assume on the surface part of this that maybe they're talking about, for example, gang members, actual firearms traffickers, people who are trafficking illegal weapons, mainly for cartels typically, and for gangs and organized crime and so on. It's a bit funny, though, because in New York, one of the things they dismantled as part of this defund the police movement was the task force meant to deal with organized crime. And you've been having many different jurisdictions across the United States really dismantling different parts of their police force. Now, what does it mean if they're going after people trafficking firearms? Frankly, if they're going after gang members and cartel members, I'd say, good, go for it. The concern here, though, is they're not going after gang members and other individuals. They might be going after people who just have firearms that may not be registered. This is one of the big concerns with it. We'll also have to see the bigger picture here, I think, of where this will go in the future. Now, they're establishing, again, these strike forces in 5 different cities that are assigned to be seizing firearms, it seems. Seizing illegal firearms in this case, right? Seizing illegal firearms in this case. But what will it be afterwards? How will it be further down the line? If they establish a special task force, they call strike forces in this case, that is assigned to search for and seize firearms, in this case illegal ones, and fair enough. What will it be after they, say, move on this for a year? What will it be after they move on this for a couple of years? Will they then expand it to go after illegal firearms defined under new laws? Because this is one of the bigger pictures, and one we've been stating for a long time. One of the reasons why the federal government is not able to enact gun laws like this, where they can seize people's firearms, gun grab laws, is because the sheriffs in many states across the United States, who are typically, who are sworn to uphold the Constitution, and who have more often than not, I believe close to 2/3 of the United States counties, the sheriffs have declared that they will never enforce a policy that means grabbing people's guns. You cannot have gun grab laws in the United States because the sheriffs will not enforce it. I've been saying over and over again that if you want to create laws like that, if they're going to be carried out, you need to have a federal level law enforcement organization to seize the firearms. They can bypass the sheriffs and carry it out themselves. And even though this current task force or strike force is assigned to seize illegal firearms and trafficking of firearms, this is what it is. This is a special strike force being done through an operation of the Department of Justice, federal government, that is assigned to seize firearms, doing something, again, that the sheriffs would very likely not carry out themselves. And the bigger picture here, too, is they're working with ATF and maybe having assigned roles with this. We'll have to see how this develops. If it is just going after gangs and cartels who are trafficking firearms, great. Get them off the streets, get firearms out of the hands of gang members. The bigger picture here, I think, is the concern of how this could develop as they've developed these federal powers to carry out operations that would be very hard for them to carry out otherwise. So, bigger picture here, we'll see what happens with it. At the same time, something else is happening. Biden is suggesting that he wants to eliminate handgun magazines that hold more than 20 rounds. It says here, another story. President Joe Biden on Wednesday said his administration wants to push for legislation that bars high-capacity magazines for handguns and rifles. He said, quote, "I'm the only guy that has ever got past legislation when I was a senator to make sure we eliminated assault weapons." Again, there's no such thing as an assault weapon, but they do try to define it. Biden said this during a CNN event on Wednesday, referring to the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act that included a ban on so-called assault weapons. And he continued stating, "The idea you need a weapon that can have the ability to fire 20, 30, 40, 50, 120 shots from that weapon, whether it's a 9mm pistol or whether it's a rifle, is ridiculous." He says, "I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things, but I'm not likely to get that done in the near term." Now, I'd like to see what this means. He is acknowledging that his ability to do that is maybe limited right now. But again, it ties also to the bigger questions of the Second Amendment and the purpose of the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights, which does ensure the right to bear arms that shall not be infringed. And of course, one of the big narratives that's being pushed by government, more on the Democrat side, is the idea that the founding fathers only intended you to have guns to, say, hunt deer and things like this. And so if you have a military type rifle of some kind that can hold multiple, maybe more than 14 rounds or whatever, that somehow this is something the founding fathers did not intend. But if you, of course, read it in context of what the founding fathers did, having again just fought a war against Britain, and many of whom said don't leave the house without a firearm. Of course, this is in broader context that the purpose of the Second Amendment, taken in context of everything else they were saying, was not just intended to fight deer, folks. It was intended to defend yourself against government tyranny. You want some broader context on this, check out the documentary we just published through Crossroads called America Rewritten. You can find that on EpochTV. Again, you can watch it, just have an email address, check it out. You can get a free trial. But we go into this. We go into as well things like the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and also notes about the nature of people's rights to bear arms throughout history, which the founding fathers were aware of. That again, the purpose of these things is not to typically fight deer. It's about being able to defend your rights against government tyranny if it ever came down to it, which was the broader context of the Bill of Rights and what the founding fathers had just gone through. Let's go over just a couple more stories, and then one or two more stories, and then I want to go into what's happening. I want to go into Q&A. I want to talk real quick first about something interesting that's happening with the Supreme Court. Now, one thing that they've been talking about for a while, the Biden administration, is the idea of packing the courts. Remember, they created a task force to look into how they can pack the courts, to appoint new judges to the Supreme Court, which will allow them to basically do anything they want. Because again, if you have a supermajority, you control the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. You control the legislative branch of the government and the executive branch of the presidential seat. You can still do a lot. You can't do everything until you control also the you control the judicial branch, which would be the courts. And the Supreme Court right now is majority run typically by people who are appointed by conservatives. Remember, Trump appointed a few different judges, but now there's an interesting take on this, which is rather than pack the courts, it seems to be the case that they're launching now, possibly suggesting at least, launching new investigations to maybe go after some of these Supreme Court justices, in this case Kavanaugh, who was appointed by Trump. Now it says here, FBI failed to fully investigate Brett Kavanaugh, Democrats say. It says here, FBI agents in 2018 gathered over 4,500 tips related to the investigation of then-Judge Brett Kavanaugh, but failed to follow up on them. Senate Democrats charged on Thursday. The FBI set up a tip line for Kavanaugh during the Supreme Court justice's nomination process and received over 4,500 relevant tips. FBI Assistant Director Jill Tyson told senators in a June 30th letter made public this week. However, the FBI appeared to merely pass on the information to the Office of White House Counsel, which had requested an investigation and later a supplemental probe. The process rankled Democrat senators who accused the FBI of being politically constrained by the White House under President Donald Trump. And so, remember what happened with Brett Kavanaugh, folks, where he was accused of all these, he was accused of sexual assault and all these things, and the narrative kind of fell apart. Where again, they talked about his drinking in college and these types of things. And again, the narrative fell apart. He was dragged through the ringers and so on. It seems to be the case now that they just want to investigate him yet again, and investigate him again possibly by unraveling the Trump administration's ability to work on the probe, and passing that now to the Biden administration being able to work on the probe. Now, whether they can actually do this to Kavanaugh is questionable, but it's interesting, I think, in the broader sense of where this could go, because I'll go into some of the broader things with this, because this ties into what's happening as well with the filibuster, which I'm going to go into in just a minute. But it seems to be the case that they understand that packing the courts may not be an option. Even among the Democrats, they don't have the votes to pack the courts. Doing so may be out of reach for them. But if they can remove Kavanaugh or remove other people who are appointed through investigations like this, by reopening investigations the FBI had, then they may be able to remove him and appoint a new justice, which would give them the control of the judicial branch of our government. Now, it's not clear whether they'd actually be able to do that, but they are suggesting it now. And so we'll have to watch on the trajectory of this, watch how this develops, something very important, of course. Now, on that note, we're also seeing something interesting developing on the filibuster, which is, again, even if Democrats have a majority in the Senate right now, they can't pass a lot of things because of the filibuster. They need to get a higher percent of votes that would, to get anything passed, and the Republicans are typically blocking a lot of that. Let's go to what's happening with this now. It says here that Biden is now opposing abolishing the filibuster. And it's an interesting shift, because he was just recently supporting, or at least suggesting that he supports, abolishing the filibuster. And he's warning that abolishing it now would throw Congress into chaos. So, interesting note. It seems to be the case they're backing away from packing the courts, and they're backing away from the filibuster. Why would they be doing this right now, right? It could be the case that maybe they don't feel they have the votes, even among Democrats, to do it. But again, you do have some Democrats who have come out and said they would refuse to vote for these things, meaning they wouldn't really be able to pass them. It could also mean that maybe they see the possible loss of some House or Senate seats in the upcoming 2022 elections. And maybe they view doing that right now as being not in their interest going forward. But something interesting is happening with this, because there's a shift in narrative, right? Let's go to what's happening with the filibuster. It says here, President Joe Biden on Wednesday pushed back against calls to abolish the Senate filibuster, a rule that requires a 60-vote majority to pass most legislation, saying that getting rid of the long-standing procedure would cast, quote, Congress into chaos and paralyze its work. Biden made the remarks during a televised town hall in Cincinnati, Ohio on July 21st, responding to an attendee who suggested it was, quote, logical to get rid of the filibuster so we can protect our democracy and secure the right to vote. Again, referring to last month's defeat by filibuster of a Democrat voting bill Republicans denounced as a partisan power grab. The president, Biden, responded by reiterating his support for the For the People Act, the act that would give the federal government more control over the elections, which he and congressional Democrats have said is needed in the face of Republican actions in a number of states to adopt election integrity measures such as stricter voter ID laws, which opponents have labeled as efforts to restrict voting. Now, again, the broader picture of this, folks, is this is happening right around the same time. They were pushing for, again, the filibuster. They were pushing, again, to pack the courts, or getting rid of the filibuster and packing the courts. Suddenly, they backed off both of these. Why would they back off both of these right at this time? Right? Again, you can assess that maybe there's a reason for it. Typically in politics, nothing happens without the advice of many different individuals, whether it be the staffers of the offices or others. Typically, it's not just one individual stating things of their own opinion. But we see the Biden administration and the Democrats backing off of two different measures that they were really pushing for very strongly just recently. And so why is this happening right now? And in the broader context, again, of us moving into the 2022 elections, maybe they believe that doing so would give the Republicans that control. Again, the Democrats have been talking about the reality that they do stand a strong chance of losing control of the House, at the very least. And Trump is, of course, backing candidates, I should say, to retake not just the House, but also the Senate as well. Maybe this is part of it. We'll have to see. It could also be something, again, when talking about the filibuster, when talking about packing the courts especially, that, again, maybe they feel they just don't have the votes to do it because, again, they need every single Democrat to get behind it. And even then, they would need to get past. It would be very difficult for us, put it that way. Maybe they've assessed they do not have the votes to do it, and so they're backing off and looking for other measures to do it, such as investigating Brett Kavanaugh again, relaunching the investigations into Kavanaugh. Again, we'll have to see how this develops, but important things to watch for, right? All right, that said, folks, let's jump into some questions. But first, I mentioned before that Crossroads is totally demonetized and censored pretty heavily by YouTube, it seems. But we have started our own platform. That's EpochTV.com, EpochTV.com. And again, if you want to support Crossroads, please go to EpochTV, EpochTV.com/Crossroads. We'll show you a quick trailer of what we're working on over there right now. Independent films are about to take off. Really, there's a lot of independent films now challenging what Hollywood used to be.
I think what Hollywood does, it's fine. I mean, the movies they do seem to be constantly bashing the right, of course. And we have turned the bad guy into the hero. We're trying to make him the great guy. Every time you see a sitcom, the dad is sort of fat and a loser and a dope. And the kids make fun of him, and the wife's got the hot babe wife, that knows all the answers. I'm trying to do movies that have a positive, a moral value to them. That make you laugh, make you cry, make you think. Movies that got hope. We need hope more than anything. Movies that got redemption. Movies that got love. So that's the kind of movies that I want to do, and I'm going to keep doing those kind of movies to fight what I got to say, the crap that's coming out of Hollywood. That's all negative.
All right, again, that's our recent interview. I'm actually, again, at Freedom Fest here by Mount Rushmore. We just interviewed Kevin Sorbo. Anybody who watched Hercules, I know I did as a kid, might remember Kevin Sorbo. He's actually working on a lot of films right now and doing some really cool stuff. So we had a great discussion with him about that. Check it out. That's on Epoch TV. And again, folks, I also did this recent documentary, America Rewritten, also on Epoch TV, which I highly recommend you watch or check out if you haven't already. And also, again, you want a free trial, check out Epoch TV. All you need is an email address. So please check it out. Again, that's EpochTV.com/Crossroads. All right, that says jump into the questions for the night. And as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat now. We'll try to get to them. First question here is from Barbara Smerzy. He said, Joshua, how can we be sure California's election for governor will be fair? Larry Elder will get my vote. Thank you for your live Q&As, Joshua. And Epoch TV is epic. I appreciate it. I appreciate the support. In terms of how you can be sure California's election for governor will be fair, as far as I know, California really hasn't changed the election laws in terms of rolling back some of the changes they may have made before. But I'd say you should still vote. You shouldn't let concerns over these things stop you from voting. In fact, I think that's the surest way to the surest way to basically roll over and die as a country is to not vote anymore. I would say vote regardless of anything, folks, and get out to the polls. In terms of in terms of the live Q&As, I really appreciate it. Real quick note too, one of the most common questions I get asked, like every single time someone introduces themselves to me when I'm at events, is it Epoch or is it Epoch? And my typical response is kind of both, and we like to confuse people by saying both. But technically, technically, if you're in America, the pronunciation is Epoch, EP, kind of like Epoch. If you're in the UK or Canada, technically the pronunciation is Epoch. But at Epoch Times, we sometimes say both because, well, sometimes people want to check out epochtimes.com and they type in EPIC Times and they go to another website. And so sometimes we just want to make sure they get the URL right. And we have some staff who say Epoch, some who say Epoch. Technically, again, if you're an American, it's Epoch. But again, you say Epoch, I say Epoch. Some people say Epoch. It's all on you, folks. They're all technically right, depending on where you're at again. Another question here is from Julie Richards. He said, Josh, have you read the 2005 scientific report about the Wuhan bat cave that says COVID-19 was detected there? They're keeping that location secret. There are numerous papers published about this. Actually, I believe you're talking about the finding of the horseshoe bat virus. And yes, I have read the report. And yes, that was included in the documentary we did last year. You folks, you might remember that last year I did a documentary, an investigative documentary called "Investigating the Origins of the Wuhan Coronavirus," and that documentary we had over 100 million views across all platforms. A lot of it was on Facebook, and then Facebook declared it was fake and said nobody should see this, and told everybody who shared it that they shared fake news and slapped everybody's hands down and erased it from the internet as much as they could. It was still on some YouTube channels, and you can still find it on Crossroads on this channel, both on YouTube and on EpochTV. I say you should still check it out because not only is the information, not only does the information still stand, but actually a lot of it's now been vindicated. In other words, proven right. Interesting note too is the way that Facebook tried proving it was false. Is the initial label saying it was false, right? The initial way they tried proving it was false was they had one of their fact checkers go and declare it was false. And we found out that initial fact checker had actually worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Their fact checker worked at that laboratory in Wuhan, China, saying that it's fake news on the grounds claiming that, it's a biosafety laboratory and there's no possible security issues with it. So anybody who says there's security issues at that laboratory is spreading fake news. And after we criticized them for that, and lo and behold, that yes, there were some serious health issue or safety issues at that laboratory, like Wuhan Institute of Virology staff posting videos of themselves getting, bat bites and being exposed to different bodily fluids of these bats and, risking cross-infection and so on. Really ridiculous stuff, handling bats without gloves and protection and so on. Ridiculous stuff. Posting photos online of their refrigerator holding some of those dangerous viruses known to man, where the seals on the refrigerator are broken and where there's over icing coming out. And, ice coming out and stuff like this. Ridiculous stuff. And so that was debunked. And then what did they do? They had a second fact checker come in after that got debunked. I believe it was some Brazilian fact checker they hired, who then claimed it was false and really just selectively did things, claiming that, you claim that it may have had parts about this, HIV virus or whatever, because, frankly, you do see immunodeficiency elements with the virus. And there's even been reports coming out now showing elements of not HIV, but similar in some ways to it with this virus, that was actually part of scientific journal reports. Scientific journal reports that were later censored and attacked as well, because anybody who talked about the virus at the time was being attacked. And so they basically tried writing it off as fake by, really ridiculous means. But most of what we said at the time has been proven true by this time. Interesting discussion is, of course, we get into the broader possible issues with Facebook on a quick side note of Trump now having this class action lawsuit against them for censorship. Now, on another note, you asked about specifically that bat cave where they wrote about finding this virus that very closely fits a description of COVID-19. And yeah, that was, I believe, the bat cave in Yunnan province, which actually the virus was held by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. That was the horseshoe bat. And as we note in the documentary last year, and watch the documentary if you haven't already, we said last year that the horseshoe bat virus, in terms of the structure of the virus, is actually really, really, really close to COVID-19. Because remember, the Chinese Communist Party, well, scientists in China initially did release information on, breaking down the virus and isolating the virus and showing what was in it. The Chinese Communist Party shut that down, and disappeared the doctors who released it. And then all the international community suddenly backtracked all their research because, again, you have all these bought-off scientists, these so-called scientific journals who were really just eating out of the hands, it seems, of individuals who may have had interest in censoring them, as Dr. Anthony Fauci's emails do suggest now. And so there seemed to be a lot of push to prevent people from talking about gain-of-function research, a lot of push even here in the United States from Dr. Fauci and working together with big tech and scientific journals and other quote-unquote scientists to make sure people don't talk about the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And so a lot going on with that, folks. Again, we'll have to see what happens with it. And now, again, you have the House Democrats blocking a bill that would have allowed for the declassification of some of that research done by the U.S. intelligence community on the possible origin of the virus. But again, you can watch the documentary we did last year on the possible origin of the virus, where we talk about, frankly, almost everything that's now being discussed and a whole lot more. So stay tuned. Maybe the rest of what we talked about will be proven true as we go forward. Another question here. This is from Ashley Ehai. You said, any idea how the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, is hearing their numbers regarding how many people are sick and vaccinated versus unvaccinated? Their data seems to be different than data from Europe. Well, no matter where you go in the world, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States, there's actually been the ongoing issue of how they're actually quantifying who is dying from the virus, who has the virus, who has been vaccinated and who has not, and in terms of who has died from things that may have been side effects of it and so on. The ability for them to prove this, let alone document it, let alone talk about publicly, the cases to count them, is really iffy. In China, under the Chinese Communist Party, they, of course, were doctoring the numbers quite a bit. In Europe and other places, they were just not counting a lot of these things. In the United States, you had different protocols, such as how they were, basically changing the sensitivity of the COVID-19 testings to assess whether or not you were infected. They can increase the threshold so that it's harder to get a positive. It's harder to get a positive result saying you have the virus. I guess they kind of invert the positive negative, but let's say harder to get a statement that you have the virus than it is to say you don't have it. In other words, you could have a flu and it might give you a false positive and so on because the threshold is high enough. When they wanted to make it look like there were less cases, it seems to be the case that they lowered the threshold, which they did after Biden came into office, meaning that it's harder to get a positive that you have the virus, meaning numbers are going to go down. In the United States, there's a big issue with vaccinations in general because there's not a lot of accountability with the vaccine companies, with the big pharma. If something happens to you, a health issue, that doesn't actually, you can't actually sue the companies. There's a government branch that works on this, that your taxpayer dollars finance, that gives a set amount of money you can actually sue for if you have bad side effects from things like this. And taxpayer dollars subsidize the payouts for the lawsuits. The companies themselves are never held accountable for it. And so the processes and so on for even dealing with any of this are very, very iffy, very, very hard to track. And frankly, there's probably not a lot of people watching to suggest whether this was caused by a vaccine or the virus or whatever else. And you also had the issue that during the height of the pandemic, people who died of almost any cause could be said to have died from the virus if the virus was found in their system. And so you had a lot of numbers that were much, much higher than they should have been because of that. Then you also had the issue that government policy, in fact, killed a lot of people, which is why actually, ironically, states that had higher standards when it came to lockdowns and so on, like New York and other places. A lot of the numbers, the death toll, came from bad government policies, such as taking people who had the virus, like elderly people, the most vulnerable population with this, and putting them into elderly homes where they then infected people and killed a whole lot of people. And again, that's bad government policy that caused a lot of that. And again, they used the numbers to give reason to change voting laws and so on. And then, of course, allowed for massive protests on the streets under Black Lives Matter and other groups where people weren't required to have masks or anything, where they basically assessed that, it's more important to go and protest for racial inequality, as they called it, than it is to abide by lockdown protocols and mask mandates and so on. They made the assessment that they could have people in close proximity to each other gathering in ways that in any other case would have been called super spreader events, and didn't seem to care about that. Even gave guidance, it seemed, to the police to step down in a lot of areas, to stand down. Why would they do that? If they actually believed the virus was contagious and you needed to wear face masks and you couldn't gather within 6 feet of each other and needed to limit these things, why were they allowing and even encouraging people to gather by the thousands, shoulder to shoulder, without masks, right? Maybe they assessed that some broader political agenda was more useful. It's hard to say, but again, there were some very strange policies being pushed by different local governments at the time that don't really align with the broader narratives they were pushing. And so there's a lot of, let's say, you call it double think. I think George Orwell called it double think, where you can hold two ideas that contradict each other, right? Two ideas that totally contradict each other and not seem to even look at the discrepancies between what you're looking at. That you can have two ideas that you believe that, if you go outside, you're killing grandma, but it's okay to go outside and protest en masse in what would be considered a super spreader event in order to fight for racial injustice, when those people, if you actually believe the virus was as dangerous as they said, that those people are basically going to their deaths by doing so, right? Doing the things that they would say would kill a lot of people by doing so. Why would they allow that if they believe the virus is actually that dangerous, right? Important questions to ask. All right, folks, last question here that I want to go into some more stories. This is from Cultured Yabo. Good to see you here as always. He said, "Hi, Josh from Oz, in Aussie." He said, "I watched Danielle D'Souza on the January 6th detainees talking on how they are being indoctrinated by their own court-appointed leftist lawyers. Also, Revolver article on FBI involvement on January 6th. Thoughts?" Well, folks, people who entered the Capitol building on the great walkthrough of the Capitol building on January 6th have been, many of them, held in solitary confinement without facing real charges in ways that are really probably not constitutional. We'll have to see what actually goes. And also in ways that, yes, they are being indoctrinated, it seems, by their lawyers in very damaged mental states because, again, they've been on lockdown, on solitary confinement. Ironically, as many parts of the U.S., New York, California, other areas, are releasing prisoners from prison en masse under different policies because, again, who knows why they're doing it. These people very likely are going to play a role with the court cases, which very likely, in my assessment, they're probably trying to hold for the 2022 midterm elections, because that's really one of the big policies they have. One of the big issues they have. They tend to rely, politics tends to use crisis and tends to use scandal as one of the main ways to get people out to vote. And this is one of the only scandals they have right now, especially against Republicans and especially against Trump. And so we'll have to see what happens with it. At the same time, with this, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, is also working on her task force, basically this House committee that is supposed to investigate the January 6th great walkthrough of the Capitol building, which they're calling the siege on the Capitol, where the only person who was killed by a police officer or a Capitol Hill officer, shot unarmed woman, again, while there were multiple police next to her, while they tried to claim that this was violent on behalf of the protesters. If the tables were turned here, you'd have protests on the streets and you'd have a whole lot of other things calling for that officer's name to be released. But again, the death even of Ashley Babbitt, a protester at the hands of one of the Capitol police officers, an unarmed woman, again, shot and killed, is somehow being used against the protesters themselves by media outlets claiming it was violent and so on. And also the death of Officer Sicknick, who they initially claimed the media lied to everybody, saying that protesters killed him. It turns out he died of health complications the day after, and talked to his brother and said everything was fine. So you have a whole lot of lies. You have a whole lot of very strange stretches of the law. You have people being held, again, in solitary confinement since January 6th still. And again, the deep politicization of this, it seems to be the case leading up to the 2022 midterm elections. And so it's a very strange issue. And again, if you have lawyers talking to people who they are putting in conditions that are going to damage them mentally, maybe they want to get them to give plea deals and say whatever they want them to say and so on. There's very strange things happening. We'll have to see whether it would hold up in court or whether they want to drag it out or how this is actually going to work, because it's very strange behavior when it comes to our law enforcement agencies and the way this is all happening. Folks, let's go now to a few more stories. It's getting a bit late, so I want to make sure we get to some stuff. Interesting note, actually, the Biden administration has actually sanctioned the Cuban communist regime. And this is actually I'm stating my opinion here, I guess. I'd say it's actually a pretty positive move on behalf of the Biden administration, especially as some of the more radical, squad Democrats have been trying to blame the Cuban protests as protests against, the evil American capitalist policy of not trading with Cuba. And people have been making fun of it, saying, what, you mean that communism can't survive without the support of capitalism? Because they can't, the communist system in Cuba can't survive unless they're propped up by American trade. Basically, in Cuba, folks, you have mass protests right now against the communist system of the Cuban government. And these are anti-communist protests. And again, communist socialists in the United States seem to be trying to blame this on capitalism, because capitalism is not helping prop up communism. It's a bizarre narrative. But you do see now Biden breaking away from that more extreme group of socialists and the squad with this, which is actually an interesting development. I don't want to go too deep into that, but it is an interesting development. But I want to talk about what's happening with the election investigations while we still have some time tonight. Actually, let me go a bit deeper into what's happening first with the Cuba issue, because this actually is a really big deal. Let's go over the story real quick. Then we'll go into what's happening with the elections. It says here, the United States on July 22nd sanctioned key Cuban Communist Party officials for human rights abuses following widespread protests across the island nation. President Joe Biden said in a statement that the administration's actions against a top-level Cuban official and a paramilitary organization known as Buenos Negros are just the beginning, and the United States will continue to sanction individuals responsible for oppression of the Cuban people. Now, in an accompanying press release, the Treasury Department stated it is sanctioning Alvaro Lopez Miera, the head of Cuba's Ministry of the Revolutionary Armed Forces, as well as Buenos Negros, officially known as the National Special Brigade of the Ministry of the Interior, over serious human rights abuses related to anti-government protests starting on July 11th. And Cuban authorities have reportedly arrested some 500 demonstrators and activists who partook in the demonstrations, which some described as the largest in decades. And again, folks, these are anti-communist protests now taking place in Cuba. It is interesting to see that Biden is, it seems, breaking away from the more radical elements of the Democratic Party, the squad in this case, some of them, who are trying to blame this on the United States and trying to get the United States to, get rid of the tariffs and sanctions and so on. The Biden administration broke that and actually put more sanctions on them, which is interesting. It's an interesting development. All right, folks, I want to go into what's happening with the election investigations and into what's happening with these spreading to other states, because there's some updates on this. Something very interesting just took place in Pennsylvania. It says here, Pennsylvania decertifies county's voting system, cites violation of election code. You hear that, folks? The voting system in one of the counties in Pennsylvania has now been decertified. It says here, Pennsylvania's top election official has decertified the voting system of rural Fulton County. Remember that name, folks? Fulton County in 2020? For future elections, saying that an assessment by a third party had violated the Keystone State's election code. They violated the election code, folks. Now, it says here, the Pennsylvania Department of State said in a statement dated July 21st that Wake Technology Services Inc.'s access to the county's voting system, quote, undermined the chain of custody requirements and strict access limitations necessary to prevent both intentional and inadvertent tampering with election voting systems. And it added that, quote, unauthorized access prevents the vendor, Dominion Voting Systems, from affirming that the system continues to meet state and federal certification standards. Big update. We'll see what happens with it as it goes forward. Again, Pennsylvania, they've been trying to, there's some push there to get a full audit. This is just decertifying it going forward, meaning there may be reform going forward. We'll have to see whether the decertifying of it and statement that they may have undermined the chain of custody through these practices, this organization, will actually make them push forward with the audit and maybe look at what happened back in the 2020 elections. We'll see what happens with it. Big update though for Pennsylvania. At the same time, something else is happening in Maricopa County in Arizona. We're having this big audit right now as we speak. It says here, Arizona Senate is not going to hold the Maricopa County in contempt due to a holdout Republican. One Republican blocked them from holding Maricopa County in contempt. It says here, the Republican-controlled Arizona Senate is not voting to hold Maricopa County officials in contempt for refusing to fully comply with election audit subpoenas because of a single Republican senator. Briefly on this, folks, they're again still conducting the audit in Arizona. They say that there's still some information they need to complete the audit. Maricopa County officials are blocking that from happening, allegedly. They tried holding those officials in contempt, and a single Republican has blocked that from happening. It says here, Republicans lost a seat in the state Senate in the November 3rd, 2020 election and hold a narrow 16-14 majority. That gives State Senator Paul Boyer, a Republican, the power to stymie efforts to hold the county's Board of Supervisors in contempt. It says here as a quote, Senator Boyer agreed to proceed with the audit, but when Maricopa County BOS refused to cooperate, Boyer would not vote with us for the resolution of contempt, which leaves us one vote short. That's a quote from Arizona Senate President Karen Fann, a Republican who wrote in a July 21st social media post. And Boyer, who didn't respond to requests for comment as of press time, did respond directly to Fann, and here's what Boyer said. He said, you told us in closed caucus the audit would not cost taxpayers more than $150,000, and you wouldn't divulge who you were hiring. Had you told us it was an inexperienced partisan firm, as he claims, I wouldn't have been the only one to object. So Boyer's, again, voting against it, but that's the grounds he's going on. Now, briefly back to Pennsylvania, something else is happening there. It says here, because again, you have 18 states right now. Remember this, 18 different states considering to some capacity holding audits to look into their voting systems, especially what happened during the 2020 elections. The model in Arizona is being what's taken for the whole country right now, for them to look at and see whether other states want to hold their own investigations. And again, the Arizona one is just looking into Maricopa County right now. Even they could expand this into other counties. But in Pennsylvania, something else is happening. It says here, Pennsylvania Republicans are going to introduce a new election overhaul bill after the governor's veto. Remember, they tried passing this bill and the governor vetoed it. Let's go into it. It says here, Pennsylvania State House Republicans will make another attempt at passing a voting overhaul bill after Democrat Governor Tom Wolf signaled he would support a measure that includes voter identification provisions. And so they're putting through a new one that doesn't have everything they wanted, but they can maybe pass voting ID laws. Let's go into it. It says here, House State Government Committee Chairman Seth Grove on Wednesday told the other lawmakers in a memo that he'll introduce a bill that Wolf vetoed last month. Other than proposing new voter identification requirements, the bill would move up the voter registration deadline, limit drop box usage, and would allow for the pre-canvassing of mail-in ballots. Now, Grove in the memo noted that Wolf recently told the Philadelphia Inquirer that he isn't opposed to voter identification requirements, namely for mail-in voting. And so we'll have to see. Maybe they'll get through some election reform in Pennsylvania, but by doing this, we'll have to see. Now, at the same time, remember in Texas, folks, Texas was also pushing forth a bill, which they have the votes for, pushing forth a bill on voting integrity to strengthen the voting systems in Texas. And they were not able to pass that, not because they didn't have the votes to do so, but because Democrats fled the state in order to block them from passing it, because you have to have a certain number of officials present when they vote for it in order to pass it. And so again, Democrats fled the state. We're meeting with Kamala Harris and other officials in Washington, and actually seems to be the case. A lot of them have fallen now ill with the virus and are infecting people among the Biden administration and the Pelosi's group. But there's an update with this, which is this. A Texas Democrat, one of them, has now left Washington and is now returning to Texas to work on the voting bill. It says here, a state Democrat lawmaker who left the Lone Star State as part of an effort to prevent the passage of a Republican-backed voting measure said he's returning to the state to engage in negotiations over the legislation. Now, they're probably not going to be able to pass this law with just one of them returning, but they're maybe sending this one representative back, it seems, maybe, to hold their negotiations and try to renegotiate while still being able to block it from getting passed, using a very interesting method in doing so, which is, again, fleeing the state to make sure they can't pass it. Now, folks, a lot going on, always a lot happening. You know, if anything that these, 2020 and 2021 and probably 2022 and even going forward brings us is that there's no shortage of big stories on an ongoing basis to talk about. And folks, again, I'll be giving you updates on these issues as we go forward. That said, if you want to help Crossroads, it still does help us if you like and subscribe, or if you want to really go the extra mile, please do tell a friend or family member about Crossroads. If you want to go the extra mile, or even just get some good content, check out EpochTV as well. If you really want to support us, that's the best way to do so. We also do have Donor Box, which you can help donate to support this channel. We do appreciate any support, folks. Now, that said, I appreciate you all. Always enjoy doing these. I'm on the road again. Some good stuff in the works. As always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. The American story was once seen as a light of strength and freedom for the world. It created a government by the people and for the people, where rights were given not by leaders, but by God. Yet now the very fabric of the nation is under assault. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?